There are 66 books in the Bible. And the Testament, the Jewish scriptures, were compiled sometime a couple of hundred years before Jesus was born. And they were translated into the Greek language, and that translation of the Hebrew scriptures is the translation that is used for the most part in the New Testament. The people in those days spoke either Aramaic or Greek, and they had lost the Hebrew tongue amongst themselves. And so the way the Old Testament verse was translated into the Greek language is how it's quoted in the New Testament. So there are 27 books in the New Testament, and there are 39 books in the Old Testament. And they were written, the New Testament books were written over a period of maybe 50 or 60 years, but the Old Testament was written over a period of hundreds and hundreds of years. The Old Testament, what we call the Old Testament, the Jews call the Tanakh, which means the law, the prophets, and the writings. It's a combined word. And so today, this passage that we have from Luke chapter 24, it says that they were on the road to Emmaus. Jesus is walking with them, and he opened their minds to the scriptures, which the only scriptures they had are what we're talking about today, the Old Testament. And there are some really amazing things in the Old Testament. For instance, if you've ever looked at the Bible, sometimes you'll start to read the book of Genesis, and then you get to chapter 3 where it talks about this one begat, this one begat, this one begat, this one begat, this one. You know, he's the father of this one. And then if you look at the book of Chronicles, there's these great big long genealogies. And if you look in Matthew chapter 1 and Luke chapter 3, you'll see the ancestry of Joseph, the father of Jesus, the adopted father of Jesus, in Matthew chapter 1, and you'll see the Virgin Mary's genealogy in Luke chapter 3. And the complete genealogy of Jesus is listed all the way from Adam to Jesus, and it's the only complete genealogy in the Bible. Now that's pretty amazing. Well, how did they do that? In the Old Testament, the verse says, beginning with Moses, Jesus has explained the things to them. Now, when it says beginning with Moses, it doesn't mean beginning with Moses himself. It means beginning with the writings of Moses. Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And so when it says Jesus began with Moses, that means he began with the writings of Moses. And he showed the things to the disciples so that their minds would be opened to the things of God and the things that are prophesied. Now, okay, good. Here's a picture of Eve and the snake. Everybody knows that story from Sunday school. The snake comes up and God says to Adam and Eve, don't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And the snake comes up and said, God's lying to you. If you eat from this, then you'll be like God and you'll know good and evil, and God is holding something back from you. And so the story is the devil speaks through the snake and deceives Eve and brings death and sickness and war and all the terrible things that we can't understand upon the human race. And at the end of the discussion in that story, as God says to Adam and Eve, particularly to Eve in Genesis chapter 9, verse 15, that's not right, it should be chapter 3, I believe. And I put an enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise you on the head, and you shall bruise him on the heel. Now it's interesting, this word seed is used throughout the Bible, and for the modern translation of what that word means, it means semen or sperm. And this is the only time in the Bible where it says the seed of the female, the seed of the woman. Every other time, it has to do with a male. And so from the beginning, this unusual child who will come from the woman, the offspring of the woman, will come and will fight with the offspring of the snake, and he will step on the snake's head, and the snake will bruise his heel. So this is kind of a little cryptic thing right from the beginning, that there's going to be, now that evil has been entered into the world, there's going to be a war between good and evil, and in the end, the offspring of the woman will overcome the evil that's in the world. You got that? So this is where it starts. The history of the coming of Christ is very clearly portrayed in the Bible. Now, in the Hebrew language, they don't have rhyme. If somebody wrote a piece of poetry, it wouldn't rhyme. It would have the same amount of beats in each meter. So it would da 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 da, and then the second line would modify slightly the first line, but it would be the same amount of meter in the poetry. And so when somebody who is a Hebrew reader, which I am not, I did get an A in Hebrew at seminary, but I don't even remember the alphabet anymore. But the translators would look at the work of Moses, particularly the book of Genesis, and they would note, by putting it in indented, where the poetry is. There'd be regular prose, regular writing up to a certain point, and then there'd be a piece of poetry, and a good translation, a good English translation will show that in indented or in italics or something. And if you look at the book of Genesis, the genealogy of the people that we're going to talk about today, the ancestors of Jesus, as proved by the book of Matthew in the New Testament and the book of Luke, this poetry inserted in the regular narrative and in the regular dialogue shows which family the Christ will come from. And it's really astounding that this is there. So it starts here with the seed of the woman. It's a prehistoric event. We don't know how long ago this happened. Then, after some time, chapter 9, verse 26, Noah survives the flood. He has 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And it tells us that Shem, which is the ancestors of the Semites, the Shemites, and people, when I was teaching in prison, they would say, well, Jesus was white. Jesus was not white. Jesus was not black. Jesus was an Oriental guy. He was descended from the Shemites, the Eastern people. And so it says that Noah had these 3 sons, and the Shemites moved to the east, and the Japhethites, the white people, moved to the north, and the Hamites moved to the south. And this is in Genesis chapter 10. And so there was a thing, and by the way, these 3 guys, even though they were the ancestors of the different races, they were triplets. They were all born the same year. No extra charge for that, but that's what the Bible teaches. So the poetry goes to the descendants of Shem, the Shemites. By the way, all of the Arabs and all of the